Welcome to this first lesson in Maya where we're going to cover the interface. It's the first thing you see when you open Maya, so it's good to get familiarized with it. And as you go through this course, you'll become more and more familiar with it and comfortable using it, but it's a great place to start just so that we know what we're looking at, because it's easy to get intimidated when you're first starting to learn 3D. I know I was when I opened up a program and you see all of these buttons and all of these menus and you have no idea what's important and what's not. And it just looks like some crazy alien interface, and where do you even begin with that? So that's why I have this lesson. You can refer back to it, but it's also just kind of to ease your fears, right? Like, you're not going to need to learn every single little button and menu option here to be successful in Maya and use it. I'm going to show you the things that we use the most, and in this interface, I'm going to show you kind of how to visually categorize these things so you can kind of know, okay, I'm probably not going to use this, so visually I don't need to worry about kind of that chaos of all these buttons up here. So let's just kind of take an overall look at this. Normally when you open up Maya, you're going to get some type of a view like this. And you can see down here that it says PERSP. And that tells us the camera view that we're viewing in the viewport. And that's what this middle section is here. This is called the viewport. And you can see the axes down here on the lower left. So you can see Y is up and Z is kind of to the left. And so this is where we're going to see everything that's happening in our scene. And down here we have a timeline for when we start animating. We can scrub this. We can play it over here. We can set it to loop back several times by clicking that. We can turn on auto key, turn that off, change the frame range, all of these things. But typically when I'm using this, I use it just like this. I scrub, I look, and then I can change frame range, clicking and dragging that, or typing in numbers here. And these two numbers actually just mean the kind of in and out points of what we're looking at versus the whole scene, right? So you can see we can kind of adjust this and slide this around, but it doesn't change the first number. And that's why that's kind of the absolute values of the in and out of the scene. But we can temporarily change that kind of scale so we can see, a smaller scale of the timeline. So it's easier to scrub a smaller section if it's a very big shot or something like that. And if you double click it, it will jump out to the whole thing and maximize to the entire length of the frame range that you've set. So that's the bottom part. And you can see down here in the bottom left, this will be very helpful as you're starting. This will display short help tips and tools and selections. So if I'm going up here and I don't know what this is and I hover over it, I'll get a tooltip that will pop up. But if you're looking in the lower left as well, it'll say the same thing. So if you're a little impatient for the tooltip to pop up, you can just look in the lower left and you can see as I scrub my mouse through, I'm not clicking anything, I'm just hovering over everything. You can see it's showing me what each one of these tools is named and what they do. And if you leave it over there, the tooltip will also pop up. So that's one quick way to figure out what all these little things do up here. Don't worry about what each one of them does yet. We'll get into that later. But just to know, these are different tabs for different kind of sections. And these sections are also kind of related to these different drop-down menus here. Maya tries to organize the menus into different disciplines. So you can see modeling, rigging, animation. It's all separated into their own menu sets because typically if you're doing one, you're not really going to be doing the other. And in a production, normally this is kind of the linear workflow of how things are made anyways. First you model something, then you rig it, then you animate it. For example, you can't really animate something that doesn't exist, so you have to model it first. And if you're going to rig it, then you need to rig it before animation. So it's just kind of, they try to do it in a way, an order that makes sense for how you're going to create things and animate things and render things. That's why these are ordered the way they are. And you can see that they change the menu options up here, but only after Windows. You can see, watch Windows, and as I change the options, Windows stays the same. So everything from File to Windows is never going to change, and everything after that will. And a lot of these things, so I'm in the animation tab here in the drop-down menu, and I'm on the animation shelf here, and you can see there's Play Blast, there's different kind of options, and a lot of those things are also here. So you can see Play Blast is here as well. it's the same icon, it's the same tooltip. So even though there's all these different buttons, they actually just put them in more than one place. So it makes it look more complicated than it is because the same option is put in several different places. So for example, with Play Blast, I could actually even right click on the timeline down here and it's off the screen. But if you do this in your Maya, you can go down to the bottom and you can see an option for Play Blast again. So Play Blast, for example, is in 3 different places. So this is also another reason why not to get overwhelmed by all these options, because visually it looks like there's a ton of them, but really they're just the same ones over and over in different ways. Depending on how you want to work or select options or menus, or how you want to select tools, then they try to give you as many options as you want, really, which is a little too much. Typically, you're only ever going to use this up here or the shelf. It's whatever you're comfortable with. I find it kind of hard to remember what each one of these icons are, and then to wait for the tooltip to pop up. Typically I'm going through the menu up here and I'm not using this as much, but it's definitely nice to have sometimes on a couple different things. Like in this course I'm probably going to make a couple spheres just to show you how things work. We'll get into manipulating things in the next lesson, but besides that, I don't really use the shelf options all that much. So now that we have this kind of shelf option and some of these menu things covered, let's look at what's in between them. We kind of see this, drop down menu that we talked about, but then there's all these buttons up here and they all do different types of things that we're going to get into a lot later. So for right now, just know that you don't really have to worry about any of these things, and we'll slowly cover these later. These aren't super important in getting started, so we're just going to skip them now for the interface. Don't worry about these. So the next kind of thing we want to look at are these different windows as well. So we have, a blank window here, we have blank window here, they have their own little tabs here, and then there's these tabs on the side. So again, it seems like there's a ton of options, but it's really not. So for example, with this tab, this can actually be, closed down by clicking it or double clicking it to open it back up. But if you noticed here, this little button gets highlighted and unhighlighted as we're clicking it. So it's the same thing like we were talking about earlier with the Play Blast. It's just a different way to select kind of menu options here. So you can do it from up here, or you can do it from this tab. So you can see the modeling toolkit, we can go back to the attributes, or we could select over here. So why this is significant is because if I create a sphere, this is going to tell me the name. It's going to tell me where it is in space. Is it on? Is it visible? And the history of the object and any inputs there are. So I can see what the inputs are. So this is kind of a quick way to see what's the status of this object, where it is. If I go to the attribute editor, I can kind of see this information displayed a little bit differently. So I can see, translate is all 0. If we go back to the channel box, we can see that's shown here as well. It's just the same thing shown twice, like we were talking about earlier. So I want to help simplify this stuff in your mind so you don't feel like that, this is something different than this. It's not. It's the same thing. It's just in a different place. So just to kind of emphasize this again, I wanted to show you something that I use quite a bit. If you hold down spacebar, you will get the hotbox menu, what Maya calls the hotbox menu. And I'm holding down spacebar and I have all of the menu options available to me. You might be able to tell that it's ordered the same exact way that the tabs over here are ordered. So modeling, you can see mesh, edit mesh, mesh tools, and so on and so on. You can see rigging, animation, effects, and rendering. And that's the exact same way this is laid out over here. So it's just a quicker way to get to all of these menus is by holding down spacebar. And I use that quite a bit. It took me a couple years to get used to it and actually use it, because I think it does take a little familiarity with Maya to feel comfortable with this. But the sooner you use this, the quicker you'll be in Maya. And I would highly encourage you to use this instead of having to hunt around for stuff up here and changing menus. You can get to everything right here by holding down spacebar. So that's a pretty useful tip that I think will be useful even more later. Now that we know what the channel box is and the difference with the attribute editor, let's jump over to this section. We can see the viewport has its own options. And if you hover over each one of these objects, You'll also get the tooltip. And so I won't go over each one of these because, to be honest, they're not very helpful as a beginner starting out. These aren't really that important. But I did want to talk about the different views in Maya. So if I don't hold down spacebar and I just tap it, you can see I get multiple views. And typically what you'll see, just click this over here, is something like this when you're just starting out in Maya. So if I hit spacebar again with my mouse just hovering over a different window, I'm not clicking anything with my mouse, I can jump into those views. And you can see what the views are by the camera name: top Y, front Z, side X, perspective. And so we can jump between different perspective views. If we need to see something top down and modeling, we can do that. So that's one quick way to divide up the screen as well. So if we wanted to divide up the screen in a different way, we can go to panels, layouts, and we can say 2 panes side by side. And that's what I had earlier that you saw, because this is the way I like to animate sometimes. So I can get back to the perspective view just by hitting spacebar. And these kind of buttons over here are just kind of like shortcuts to these different modes as well. Instead of hitting spacebar, you can kind of jump through. And one of the last things I want to talk about is the outliner. And the outliner you're going to have open and spend a lot of time in because it's basically a table of contents of what's in your scene. You can see that we have these different cameras that we saw earlier when we were in the kind of 4-view setup, and they're all gray because they're hidden. We can't actually see them in the interface. So we can see the P-Sphere 1, and that's one way that we can select this object, or we can select it just by clicking it, left mouse clicking. So that's kind of 2 ways to select things, either through the outliner or through the viewport. So that is a quick rundown on the interface. I hope it got you a little more familiarized with what you're looking at when you open up Maya. It's not as intimidating as it seems, and if you follow along with this course, you will just pick up these things, and so that I won't have to walk through each little button kind of in a dry way. We'll take a project-based approach so that you'll get more familiar with the interface as we go along. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson where we will briefly cover manipulators and how to move stuff around in Maya. Thanks for watching. Welcome back, and let's quickly cover how to move things around in Maya. There's a couple things to understand, especially in 3D, that's important, and so let's jump right in and cover that. From the previous lesson, I still have the sphere here. If you don't have that, I can just delete that, and we can go up here to this polygon sphere and click that. You can also get to it by going to Create, Polygon Primitives, and Sphere. One other thing that's kind of fun with these menus is you can actually tear them off. So you can see there's this little option here. If I hover my mouse just above this, and most menus have this, this one has it, most all of these menus have this little option here. So if I knew I was going to make a lot of primitives, a lot of spheres or something, just as an example, I can just click that and I'll have this kind of menu torn off. So now I can just click this a bunch of times, and if I open up my outliner, Windows Outliner, I can see I made a bunch of spheres. We only need one, so I'm going to shift select all of those below it and hit delete. And I'll select the sphere here. I'm also going to click and drag this outliner and let it hover here and let go so it'll kind of dock it in the window here. I'm going to close this menu that I had hovering, and I can get back to it, up here if I want. Now that we have the sphere, you can see that there's these kind of squares and different things going on here. So let's take a look. The way that we manipulate things in Maya is basically through several different tools. One of which, as you may have already seen, by hitting Q you can get to the select tool, or you can select it up here. It's just the cursor option. I can select the object here just by left mouse clicking. I can also select it from the outliner here. So we've got the object selected, but now I want to move it. How do I move it? I can hit W on my keyboard to pull up the shortcut for the manipulator. I can also select it over here. You can see the move tool is what the tooltip says, and you can see as well that in parentheses it says W. So we can also see the shortcut is listed there. So now with the sphere selected, and if you can notice, even with the move tool selected, I can select different objects. You don't always have to have the select tool selected to select new things. You can have the move tool selected and you can still select stuff. So you can also click and drag to select things in a group. So now that we have this one thing, let's move it around. I can click any axis and it'll be isolated to that axis. I'll undo that, And you can see it's isolated because the axes manipulator turned yellow. If I click the vertical one, it turns yellow, or the z-axis, it also turns yellow. So now I know no matter if my mouse is going up and down or something weird, that it's only going to go along that axis. But if I want to have a free movement, I can just click in the middle and move the thing around wherever I want it. The other thing I can do is isolate on 2 axes, and that's what these little squares are here, that I can, know I'm only moving it in the vertical and x-axis. I use these quite a bit actually, because in 3D space it's hard to tell where you're moving something sometimes. So, it's hard to tell if that's actually vertically up or if I moved it back in space. So by selecting these, you can tell that I'm not moving it up. I'm moving it in the X and the Z on this flat plane, this grid. And if you can't see this grid for some reason, if it didn't default to that, you can also turn that on here or turn it off if it's distracting. That's just one of these little options up here. So now that we know how to move things around, let's rotate it. So we can hit E on the keyboard, and similarly we can find it over here in this little toolbox window. And you can actually turn off these options from Windows, UI elements, and you can turn off the toolbox. Now you can see that disappears. If you find yourself not using those, it's nice to turn them off and you have more screen real estate for the viewport. But for now, since we're all beginners and we're just starting out, let's leave that up. So I'll go back to the UI elements, meaning user interface, and I'll go down to toolbox and bring that back. So with the rotation, it's very similar, that we can isolate different axes and they turn yellow, and we can click in the middle here and have a freeform option. One thing to keep in mind is, because we're working in 3D, watch the x-axes. If I click the z-axis and drag the red one down, now the red one is where the green one used to be. Did you see that? So I just undid it. So right now the green one is kind of going around, and if I bring the x-axis, the red one, down, now that's replaced it. So who's to say which axis is which now? Because before I rotated it, the green one was down here, the y-axis. But now because I rotated z, the x-axis is down here. So this option, this kind of view that we're seeing, is based on the object, right? Because the object is rotating, the axes are changing. And that's something very important to keep in mind, because that'll be important later in animation and stuff. So just keep that in mind, that because now we're in 3D, these things actually kind of matter. And we can control them in different ways. If we hold down E, which is the shortcut for rotation, if we hold down E on our keyboard and then click, left mouse click, we can drag to the world option. So now you can see the manipulator pop back to have the green going around here like it was before, even though the object is rotated. So what this is saying is we're now rotating based on the world axes, which never change, right? So even when we move an object around, you can see the manipulator itself is not changing. So we can always have the option, even if an object is rotated weird, to isolate based on the world axes. We just need to change that by holding down E and clicking and choosing this option. If we go back to object, you can see it still kept all those changes. And now, based on the object's rotation, we can see the axes are moving all around, and so that's just something to keep in mind for later. So when we get into animation, this will be important, and I explain later in animation why that is important. So the other thing that just for myself I like to do is I like to only ever stay on the channel box unless I'm doing something very specific, because you can see this attribute editor here. You can see it says attribute editor right here on the side. It takes up a ton of room. There's just a lot of stuff going on and we don't need it. And so I like to keep the channel box open, because now we can see the values. We can zero them out. We can click and drag them and then hit 0 and zero everything out. This is way more useful when we're moving stuff around than the attribute editor. I'm also can slide that down to free up more space for the viewport. So similarly to the rotation axes being different, the move axes can also be different. So right now you can see even though the object is rotated, the axes are pointing relative to the world. So if we hold down W, similarly like we held down E earlier, if we hold down W and left click, we get the same option, right? World object. So now we can see it's following the rotation. So it's following the object axes now. So that's just two different ways to manipulate the same object, based on its own axes or based on the world axes. So that's important. The final thing we're going to talk about is the scale. If you hit R, or you can go over here and click the scale button or the scale tool, and we can scale uniformly, and we can also scale on axes. And that's pretty straightforward. So we've gotten this far and we haven't moved around anything. How do we move around? So we have an object, now let's move around it. I want to zoom into it. How do I zoom in? I can mouse scroll, which I don't use that much, but the other option I have is to hold down Alt and right click and then drag my mouse. And you can see I'm doing the same thing. I'm zooming in and out. And this is why you need a 3-button mouse, because now if you click and hold the middle mouse button, I can pan around. And then if I, still holding Alt, if I left click, I can rotate around an object. So with the combination of these three things, I can do all sorts of moves and zoom in on things. And say I get way out here and I can't really see what I'm working on, I can click and drag and select the thing. I can select it from the outliner, and then I can hit F. So hit F and I jump back to the selection that I have, and now I'm free to move around again and do all that. You can also get to that option from the view menu here. I can go to view, frame selection. One other thing that's very helpful is look at selection. So for example, if we're over here and I'm rotating around, I'm not rotating around the object anymore. And why is that? That's because my center of interest is somewhere over here and I can't rotate around the object. So if I want to rotate around the object, I can go look at selection. So the position of the camera didn't change, but now it's just rotated looking at the selection. And now I can pivot around that object. So that's one way to help control your camera. And if your camera gets too crazy, you can always select it from here, select camera, which is whatever camera this viewport is, we'll select it. You can also select it from the outliner because we know it's PERSP. You can see on here PRSP, PERSP, perspective. And you can see now we have all the values here, and we can just zero those out if things got too crazy. And of course now we're inside the sphere because we're at 0 world space. And now you can see I'm rotating from some crazy point out there. I can select my object, hit F, and now I'm rotating around it and I'm back. So that's a quick introduction on how to move, scale, rotate, and move the camera around. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.